Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to do the exercise. Let's get started with the solution right now. I'm going to Eclipse. I'll close the first project, Learn Spring Framework 1. I don't need it, so I'll say close project. And we already have a simple example to launch a simple Spring context. So simple Spring context launcher application. I'll use that as the starting point. I'll do a Control C and Control V on the A0 package. I'll do a Control V and I'll call this examples C1 and I'll say OK. So we have C1 in here, and simple Spring context launcher application is what we are looking at right now. Over here, this would be the application which would be used to launch the business calculation service. So I'll rename this. So I'll call this real world example Spring context launcher application. That sounds pretty cool. Let's say OK and continue. That's good. So what we want to do now is we would want to start with creating the classes for this. So we would want to create a public interface data service. So let's start with creating an interface for the data service. Let's refresh so that the packages appear properly. So we are making use of examples C1. So I'll actually create a new interface in this package. The name of the interface is data service. So data service, and it would have a method int retrieve data. I can copy and paste it in here as well. And now we would want to create implementations for this specific interface. We'll need to have two implementations for this. So I'll say new class, and the first class name is MongoDB data service, and let's go ahead and say finish. And this would be implementing. So we'll be implementing the data service interface. So let's go ahead and implement data service interface. And as soon as I say it implements data service, there's a compilation error. I'll do a Control 1, Command 1, add unimplemented methods, and I can go ahead and return some data back. Let's use the same data which is present in here. So copy, paste. Looks good. Now the MongoDB data service, Control C, Control V. Let's create a MySQL data service as well. MySQL data service. The naming looks good. So let's go ahead and open that app and let's make it return the data which is present in here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's make it similar to what we have in the exercise. Nice, isn't it? This is all set. Next, we would want to create the business calculation service. So let's go ahead and create a new class. New class, business calculation service. And what do we want to do in the business calculation service? We have the logic in here. We have a method called find max, which would do this business logic, right? So let's copy paste in, make sure that it compiles. Let's maximize it. Let's organize the imports. Java util arrays is imported in. That looks good. Now it needs the data service. So what I'll do is say data service, data service, and let's make it private. Let's do organize imports. Let's format code. This looks good. Let's now look at the instruction. So we have created the classes and interfaces as needed. We would want to use constructor injection to inject the dependencies. So data service is a dependency for the business calculation service, and we would want to use constructor injection. So what I'll do in here is to create a constructor. So public business calculation service, business calculation service, and data service. You would typically call this super first, and then you can say this dot data service is equal to data service. So this is the constructor which is ready. That looks good. And we would want these to be components. So what I'll do is make all of these as components. So add component organize imports. So you have add component on business calculation service. Let's add it on MySQL data service. That looks good, and MongoDB data service as well. Nice. These are all now managed by Spring Framework. The next thing I want to do is to make MongoDB primary. If I run it as it is right now, you'll have multiple candidates exception. You'll have an exception saying there are multiple matching candidates. And that's why what we'll do is we'll make this a primary one. So primary. And we can go ahead and create a Spring context and retrieve the bean and run findmax. So let's go ahead and do that in the Spring context. So real world Spring context launcher application. Right now what we are doing in here, we are launching the context and just printing all the beans which are defined in here. Let's see what would be the output of this first. Right click, run as Java application. Cool, it's printing all the beans in here. So that's cool. So we have the configuration class, we have the business calculation service, MongoDB data service, and MySQL data service. So we would want to get the business calculation service and run the method on it. How do we do that? It should be easy, right? We have been doing that multiple times. Context dot get bean. We'd want to get the bean of business calculation service dot class. And on this bean, we'd want to invoke the find max method. Is that what we want to do? And run the find max method. That looks cool. And what I would do is do a sys out of this. So sys out of this specific thing. Let's quickly get that done. Okay, that looks good. Oops. Let's organize this so that you can see the entire code. That looks good. Let's run this. And we have 55, which is printed in here. Typically, whenever we talk about real world applications, this is how you would have a business service which is calling a data service. And right now you'd see that we have been focusing on the business logic only. We don't really need to focus on how to create an instance of the data service, how to create an instance of the business service, how to wire dependencies in. Nope. All those things are now being taken care of by the Spring Framework for us. And Spring Framework allows us to focus on the business logic. I hope you had a great time doing this exercise, and I'll see you again in the next step.